Hello, everybody. It's me, Bigfoot, Michigan Rob. It's Monday. No, it's not Friday. Yes, Friday I put out my cryptid stories, but I'm doing something here on a Monday. Before I get started, thank you to each and every single one of you that reach out to me via email, via direct message, via Facebook regarding my surgery over the weekend. I love each and every single one of you. I'm doing much better today. I'm going to be laid up. Good old BMR is going to be laid up for a little while. Won't be able to walk for a little bit. I'm not going to bore you with that, but I am doing better. Thank you for the well wishes. I reached it. Excuse me, you guys. I researched this story about 5 months ago, and I wrote this story. Collected my data, my facts, because it's something that encompasses everything we're all interested in. There's cryptids, there's the supernatural and paranormal, there's the missing people, there are hexes from spirit leaders or indigenous people, or ancient peoples. It's got something for everyone. You're going to enjoy this. There is some length involved with it, but it is something different. I'm always looking to improve, I'm always looking to expand. So it's got everything in it. A couple quick notes I do have to make when it comes to the missing people. I believe it's not one thing. I mentioned in the title of this Bigfoot, the missing. Well, I think cryptids are involved, the paranormal's involved. Dumb human beings that don't know or have any reason to be in the woods come up missing. And even people that are experienced in the woods. And of course, there's always nefarious individuals. So this has everything. And I also have to preface it. I start with about a 1.5 or 2 minutes. I talk about the Bermuda Triangle. This story is about the Vermont's Bennington Triangle, but there are a couple parallels you'll take note of as the story unfolds. So there's going to be a brief history lesson on the Bermuda Triangle before I get into the meat of the entire show or story, and I thought that that would be pertinent. So bear with me. The super thanks is open. If you care to donate, I would appreciate it. If not, always subscribe, always share. Bigfoot, Michigan Rob. Here we go. Have you ever heard of the Bermuda Triangle? Well, certainly you have, as it is one of the most highly regarded phenomena encompassing several, if not tens of decades, some which date back to the early mid 19th century. What is it that keeps us all intrigued by this enigmatic section of the North Atlantic Ocean, whose boundaries today are still questioned off the Florida panhandle? The area has been notorious for the disappearance of more than 50 ships and well over 20 aircraft during this time period, with little to no reason nor explanation. The baffling thing about the Bermuda Triangle is that during rescue missions, never has there been an account for wreckage, for bodies, or even a hint of what caused these strange disappearances. Theories have been suggested as environmental factors, geophysical factors, and in some cases, the supernatural. Some skippers of these vessels or pilots of the aircraft had all reported coordinates when they were in distress. But according to some scientists and researchers' speculation, a magnetic field, perhaps miles beneath the ocean's floor, had caused several navigational error by those well trained and seasoned pilots and captains. Certainly, this does make for great stories, for great bedtime fodder. Something you can discuss at a party if you're bored or you want to be the life of the party. Certainly, a lot of people bring up all these crazy accounts and mysteries. But there's probably nothing more crazy or haunting or mysterious, you guys, as what I'm about to report on or read you on that I wrote, the Bennington Triangle in Vermont. The phrase Bennington Triangle was first coined in 1992 by New England author Joseph A. Citro. This vast remote forest and wilderness encompasses the Glastonbury Mountains just north of Bennington by its massive ridgeline, which dominates the eastern landscape. Sitting outside of the mountains within the ridge consists of these towns, pertinent for our story today: Woodford, Shaftesbury, and the ghost towns of Glastonbury and Somerset. In describing the woodlands of this great landmass, it consists of beech trees, balsam fires, red spruce, white and yellow birch, and a widespread of allotment of ash trees. The fauna includes most all of our wildlife, but it is widely known for bears and proves to be a great habitat for the producing of bear cubs. With an average elevation of 3,700 feet and 15 miles of trails running through the Appalachian Trail to the top of the Glastonbury Mountains, a wide variety of birds, including the dark-eyed junco, white-throated sparrow, and an assorted warblers and wrens, make for excellent bird watching. Hopefully, this has set the beauty and elements involved in this story. A story full of unfound disappearances, murder, bizarre and paranormal activity, rocks that seemingly come to life and take us to inner earth, the stories of Bigfoot and wild men, and not to forget the tribes of the First Nations that deem this land as evil and warn us not to travel through it or even speak of the Bennington Triangle. Native American tribes Mohican, Abenaki, Pennacook claim cursed grounds. Back in the early 1800s, these native tribes were known to bury their dead at the base of Mount Glastonbury, where the Appalachian Trail stopped, leading up the mountainside. This ritual went on for many years until the legend of the four winds arose, with mighty gusts coming from the four corners of the compass, deeming north, southeast, and west. During this time, the woodland surroundings, the burial mounds at the base of the mountain, would not emit any sounds of wildlife. The rustling of deer, bear, and bigger game ceased. The chirping of birds became non-existent. The minute tussles of smaller rodents and vermin seemed to vanish. The howling and whispers of the four winds were the only sounds identified in this land. It was a ghostly and malevolent sound that kept the Mohican, Abenaki, and Pennacook far away. Their custom of burying their dead stopped in fear that the spirit aura would be tainted, perpetuating a cleansing of the newly departed nature spirit. Many of the First Nations even believed that traveling of evil spirits crossing from other dimensions and wormholes had been created in an effort to keep them away. This further tainted the Abenakis' belief in their god, Tabaldak, whom they believed the four winds had corrupted him and made him an evil entity that the tribesmen could no longer trust. Forthcoming, the sounds of giant beasts and hairy wild men roamed this territory, further scaring off all wildlife and tainting the purity of what was once regarded as sacred land. Even more imposing was the growing fear of the cursed rock or stone that seemed to be possessed. Tribesmen would tell tales of people stepping onto this normal-looking rock. Upon doing so, would be swallowed up whole and sucked down into inner earth, trapped with only their disembodied spirit free to roam the land, to capture the living and take them to the depths of Middle Earth, where they too would embark havoc on the land. This went on for many years, and this land was left unsettled without any tribal populace set forth to raise families, create infrastructure, collect upon the resources, or provide food or any life substance for these great peoples. It was declared cursed and left alone. The area was more like a wasteland, uninhabited and uncharted, until the early to mid-1940s, when the curse turned more foul and more sinister. Then it started, and then the disappearances began. Later years, 1967, moving forward. Before we jump directly into some of these mysterious disappearances, it is imperative that we remain focused on the First Nations and the paranormal occurrences and cursed land, as they do somehow seem to play a role throughout the story. During the late 1860s, the eerie aura of Glastonbury took a foothold as settlers started to arrive to this land and recount strange activity that stemmed from the mountains. Strange sounds and smells would rain down at the foothills of the settlers' camps that brought a sense of worry or the feeling that they were not wanted, suggesting that establishing roots would not be allowed. In 1867, there is an alleged account of a wild man that avoided human society. In fact, it is questioned whether or not the specter was even human at all. This human like figure was reported as coming down from the hills of the mountains dressed in nothing but a long coat while brandishing a revolver on the side of his hip. The tale goes on to say upon entering the town of Glastonbury that this entity would seek out women and expose himself to them from beneath his coat. Then he would vanish deep into the mountains. Some suspected that the wild man perhaps lived in a connecting cave system leading up the mountains as an explanation for the swift vanishing act that was portrayed. Some question whether this was even human at all. Strange murders of 1892 to 1897. In April 1892, Henry McDowell of Fayetteville was murdered by John Crowley. It was reported that Mr. McDowell's head was bashed in with either a large wooden stick or a big rock. John Crowley had fled town and was later apprehended in a small town just inside the state of Connecticut. What makes this so very strange is that during interrogation, Mr. Crowley, during his full confession of committing this gruesome act, described the sounds of strange voices inside of his head, prompting him to murder Henry McDowell. Convicted, John was sentenced to an asylum in upstate Vermont. Later, Crowley escaped in what was reported as a railroad car and was never seen again. Speculation is that the fugitive returned to Glastonbury or escaped up into the mountains. The eerie cries of a man in agony, perhaps of murder victim Henry McDowell, could be heard in the distance coming through down the valley below the mountainside, as reported by residents of Glastonbury. 5 years later, 1897, 40-year-old John Harbour was hunting with his brother and a friend at Bigfoot Hollow, a desolate and remote area just south of Glastonbury. The trio of hunters had separated when the brother and friend heard the blast of a rifle discharge in the distance. The words of John Harbour rang out, "Help, I've been shot." The brother and friend went searching for John to no avail. A search party was then dispersed into the woods where the next day at approximately 11 in the morning the body of John Harbour was found. The legs of Harbour's body were sprawled out from beneath a cedar tree. The loaded gun beside his body was not fired, and the odd thing about the body is that it was not at all where the location John had been hunting. In fact, the body was so far away that neither John's brother or friend could have heard him shout out to them from the night prior to the incident. The body, in fact, had been removed from one location to another. The question is, how did he get there? Why was he moved? What or who is the shooter? Was there a shooter? There were no signs of the dragging of the corpse, nor were there any visible footprints. It is almost like the body was transported without physical means. This strange death has never been solved. With the mysterious murders of these two men, Glastonbury was thrust back into the forest of a place being cursed or haunted, and the decline of this mountainside and the community, the plague, started again. The Bennington Monster. In a final act leading to some bizarre disappearances in this strange land, you must hear the story of a group of travelers accompanied by a stagecoach through the mountains of Glastonbury. This takes place outside of Woodford during the early 1900s. It was dark and gloomy. A wicked rainstorm was falling, beating down upon the road at the stagecoach that had been traveling. The rain had fallen so hard that the road became unsafe to navigate, rendering the stagecoach driver to slow down and eventually had to come to a complete stop. What transpired after being struck in the mountains stuck in the mountains, on this night had to be one of the worst nightmares that they would ever experience in their lives. The stagecoach driver, after stopping, got down from his porch atop the coach to examine what he thought to be some sort of fresh tracks in a now deteriorating road. He knew that these tracks were to be fresh, that the pounding of rain was easily washing away everything in sight. Getting closer to these tracks, the driver of the coach had realized that these tracks were of nothing they had ever seen. They are very long, wide, and extremely huge. In fact, without a measuring device, he assesses them to be at least more than double his size of a 9-foot or inch shoe. The horses started to get a little bit uneasy, but the driver paid not much attention in awe of these tracks. He quickly motions to the passengers on the coach to come out and help him analyze what he had come upon. The passengers emerged from the stagecoach, and they too were in amazement and wondered as to what or whom cast these footprints. The horses now became extremely spooked and started rustling about in a frenzy. Now the band of members also became very apprehensive, and now the sides of the carriage began to be struck with a very violent and powerful force. The thudding upon the coach grew louder and even stronger than the final blow. And on the final blow, the entire coach had tumbled over as if it were a feather blowing in the wind. Staring almost in shock, the carriage and driver and the rest of the party noticed huge glowing eyes appearing just from the side of the now immobile coach. The eyes peered at them, then appeared to rise at least 8 feet from them. The beast was indeed every part of 8 feet tall and covered in very long hair. It growled a horrid grunt before it disappeared into the woodline behind them. If you recall the earlier story of the wild man that rambled through the town of Glastonbury in 1867, some suggest that this to be not the same being, or maybe it was the same person or being. The strange part about this is that it would date this creature to be well over 80 years old. Depending on exactly when in the 1900s that this encounter took place, this squashed the theory of a human-like wild man, further affirming this to be something more of a paranormal or monster. Hence, the legend of the Bennington Monster was born. On a side note, 1943 is when the people of Bennington started to go missing. Kel Herrick was missing just outside of Bennington during a hunting trip, when he was found dead 3 days later. Surrounding his body were those massive footprints, much like the stagecoach attack. Kel Herrick was squeezed to death, lifeless. That is going to conclude the story for today. I'm going to put out part 2, which goes on about 5 murders or missing people associated with the Bennington Triangle. I'll be putting that out next week because this went on about 19 minutes. I know a lot of people, they don't like anything that goes over a half hour. I hope you enjoyed that. Let me know if you want to hear part 2. Please leave a comment. Please leave a super thanks if you would wish to do so. This is Bigfoot Michigan Rob. I love you guys. I appreciate you guys. Subscribe. Share me out. Have a wonderful day. And again, thanks for all the well wishes for my recovery. So far, without you guys, it'd be a lot more dreary these days. Thanks.